Now, welcome back to this final installment of our series of conversations around the aesthetics of resistance. So this is the final day of the School of Resistance, so hopefully we will all be graduating tonight. I'm not entirely sure, but we'll see. I'm joined again by the director Milo Rau, as well as the French writer and actor Edouard Louis, and the French philosopher and sociologist Geoffroy de Lagasnerie. Now, so far we've already covered a lot of ground over the past 2 days. But this session we wanted to focus on the aesthetics of socially engaged arts. So our purpose today will be to explore the ways in which arts may be defined as socially engaged today. Now, perhaps we could start with you, Geoffroy, because we ended the conversation with you yesterday. And I wanted to ask you, you've written about this, about what the principles of socially engaged art might be today, what qualifies or does not qualify, in your opinion, as political arts. Could you perhaps give us, say a few words about what those principles might be for you today in the 21st century?
Yes, hello. Thank you very much. Yes, it's true. But first, perhaps I want to, as you say, I want to say that every art is engaged. Every art is politically engaged. Is engaged in the conservation or in the transformation of cultural structures, social structures, economic structures. I don't know. So it's very hard for me to say what is the aesthetics of a politically engaged art, because every art has to be seen as political. And it's true that in the social world, we have a tendency to depoliticize the right or depoliticize the conservative forces, and always say that the left is politics, but the right is politics too, the right is engaged too, the right is committed too, and everything is politics when you do art. But I think perhaps one question we can ask too, and perhaps to be more radical, so we can elaborate on some principles for an art that would be ethics, as I call it in my book, L'Art Impossible. But one of the questions I ask is, when we think about politics, perhaps we can too address the idea that is art necessary if we want to do politics? Why art is necessary? And isn't there, can't we sometimes identify an antagonism between artistic project and politically engaged project when you want to change society? You know, I quote in my book L'Art Impossible the very important idea about Herbert Marcuse, when he says that artists are people who tend to adhere to the idea that we want another society. They want to negate the real in order to produce something different, in order to produce another idea of the world. But differently with activists or theoreticians, they don't do that in the reality. They don't do that in the real world. They do that in the realm of the imaginary. And so he says that in fact there is a kind of grief of the political ambition at stake in the artistic impulse. And when you want to do art, in fact, sometimes you can say you renounce to do revolution. And Marcus says doing art is in fact not doing revolution, is maintaining the project of a utopian society, but without acting really to transform the society. And so you can argue that in fact there is a contradiction between the logic of political action and the logic of aesthetics. And that's why, for me, I would say that my question would be, is there a plus-value in art when you want to do politics, or is it possible to legitimate an artistic practice by a political goal? And on the contrary, can't you always argue that when you want to do politics, you can always do it better without art, or you can do it without recourse to aesthetics? And so perhaps for me, it is implicit of our three discussions that we need art, that we have to articulate art and politics, that we have to do art politically engaged. And perhaps the question we can ask is it real? Is it true? And do we really need art to do politics?
Now, perhaps, Edouard, you want to react, because Geoffroy mentions that sense of grief that might come with the act of making art, of writing, in your case, of perhaps of being on stage. Is that something that you recognize, or would you put it differently?
Something true in what Geoffroy says, and something I completely disagree with. There is obviously this feeling of mourning and of grief when you write a book, when you write a piece of art, because you know that you are not achieving a transformation that you could achieve in going to the streets, helping homeless people, demonstrating, taking a boat and helping migrants who are dying in the Mediterranean, like Cédric Héroux did, and this kind of thing. So it's true that there is this constant feeling of shame when you don't like the world you live in. At the moment you are writing, you know that you could do something more and something more efficient right now. And this is true that for me it's important to write with this feeling of shame and to use this shame as a tool in order to be constantly confronted by the world and by the society as an artist, and not try to get rid of this shame, but really to use it in order to make the least unethical art possible. But at the same time, I disagree with Geoffroy because, as we said, we were discussing yesterday and before yesterday, there are several levels of an individual and several levels of transformation. And as a political subject, I want the ability to be transformed at all those levels, you know. And clearly there are some transformations that a book will never achieve. I don't think a novel will destroy the class society, for example, right? I don't think a novel will do it. Le Manifeste du Parti du Communiste from Karl Marx almost did it, but I don't think a novel will do it. But at the same time, you know, there are things that a social movement will never achieve either, you know. This feeling of, for example, as I was saying before yesterday, this feeling of building yourself as a gay person when you watch a movie of Gus Van Sant, or when you watch a movie of Pedro Almodovar, or when you watch, you know, a movie that is like portraying the life and the desire and the happiness and the suffering of the person you want to become, of the person you are and that you want to become. And, you know, I've been kind of challenged by the time we have been going through with the pandemic on what is transformative, what is necessary, what is important for an individual. You know, during this pandemic that we will probably talk one day in the books of history, there were supermarkets that were open, for example, and you had government saying to the people, you can buy food there, but you cannot buy, I don't know, like lipstick in the supermarket, you know? And so how could the state define for us what is more important for us, what is more transformative for us, what is more essential for us? And sometimes art is bringing this possibility of transformation that is not, you know, socially considered as something important, but that can be at an individual level something extremely important. And they are like this possibility of creating yourself and of self-reinventing yourself that you encounter in front of a piece of art that a social movement will not necessarily bring you. And I want this. I want those two possibilities to happen at the same time. And a world in which you can only change the social gender justice or the social class justice or the racial justice, but a world in which you cannot recognize your melancholy in someone else, in which you cannot recognize your loss of a loved one, in which you cannot recognize your urge to dance, for example. It's not a society that I want to live in. So clearly there are a transformation that art and literature will never, once again, will never bring, will never create. And this is a problem for art. This is a missing part of art. But there are also all these things that we can change, and that are part of an individual too. And I think that it's like different fragments of a being, you know. A book will not give you what love gives you. Love will not give you what politics gives you. Sexuality will not give you what music will give you. But I wonder if it's possible to create a kind of a cartography of the possibility of changing, in which art would be a part and politics would be a part also, but without dismissing each other in using the other. But I know there is a tension here. There is a tension because it's also the way that bourgeois arts define itself, and defend itself in saying we can talk about wherever you want, and at the end it justifies the bourgeoisie writing books for decades again and again about their little bourgeois life in the theater, getting divorced and losing their bicycle and being traumatized by that. And they say, this is the right I have because I have multiplicity within me. So I know there is a tension here. I know it's not easy, but I don't think that it's something that we can dismiss like I think Geoffroy was doing in a way. I think there is something in between that is what we can find, and I think the thing that we can find in talking together today, but clearly.
Milo, I'm sure there's a lot in there that you want to react to, but perhaps just one question to start. Edouard mentioned the time that we're going through, and of course we're still very much in the middle of it, but has the pandemic affected your way of thinking about your work in some ways, or are you at least considering some ways in which to move forward based on what we've been going through?
Yeah, I mean, that's a question I think we all answered many, many times in the last weeks and months. And I think new things came to us, new medias became important. For example, this discussion became possible, and we just do it. So as I joined many, and everybody of us, many discussions like this that were somehow impossible before, even if the technology was there. So we kind of found out that we can do that at any moment. And I think these kind of relations are quite interesting. And it's also how the School of Resistance is based. When we said, okay, why don't we meet in the virtual space people from different continents, from different fields, etc., to talk about? And that's the point where perhaps I would slightly contradict to Edouard, to somehow totalize the act we can do together, because I think one big problem, and somehow we went further in it and we somehow overcame it with new strategies, is the fragmentation of our work we do. That if we are a teacher or a soldier or I don't know, a scientist or a writer or a theater maker, we are working in different fields. And I think what we should do, and I'm talking now as an artist, is trying to totalize the act of art. And here I come back to, I think, what Geoffroy said in the very beginning of the discussions, when he said not engaged art is impossible, and we should highlight again everything what in bourgeois art is not very well seen. For example, the concrete, the clear, and I would even say the ideological, that you say, I do this work for this aim. I want to highlight this, and I do it to change this. I think it's very important when you want to be political in a real sense, to be very explicit. So I would say that's for me the first point, how to be activist in art, is to be ideological and very concrete what your aims are. The second thing is, for me, against the fragmentation, I think collective work is really the way out of it. To focus on the process, on your network of knowledge, how you produce a work, more than on a product, that you say, fuck the product. I'm not interested in this kind of premieres and critiques and so on. Of course, you're somehow depending on the economic value of the work you do, that you have more this than that in the critique, but that you find ways and institutions and solidarities that the premiere is not valued anymore. That is about the process, and you would value the process you have, the power of the process. And the last thing is, I think, against isolation, that we should really try to do popular art. We should really try to have the biggest impact possible. I think that was one question you asked us in your email preparing this discussion. What is about a kind of a repertoire of resistance? Is there a kind of a, and because this is called I think aesthetics of resistance. And it's not by accident that it is called like this, these discussions, because it's the title of a book by Peter Weiss. I don't even know if this book is known. It's very known here in Germany as a book, and it's a very interesting book, because actually it's a book, a description of the struggle of the working class through the description and the confrontation with big artworks from, I don't know, Delacroix, Liberty Guiding the People, or Géricault, or Dante, or and so on, a kind of a reappropriation of the classics by the working class or by the people that is only depicted in these images, and by watching them, giving them a new interpretation and a new practice, it would become again a part of their real hidden history and forgotten history. And I think this for me is one outcome, because I was also asking myself, why do I go back to the classics, the Bible and Aeschylus and so on since some years now? Why am I interested in and not creating kind of completely new stories? And I think this is also something we should start to focus on, and it's perhaps a kind of a repetition of the socialist realism to revisit somehow the classics in a new way and under the perspective of new collectives.
Now, perhaps, Geoffroy, what would you make of the notion of the repertoire in this sense? Because to many people, it is inherently conservative to have a repertoire of works that perhaps requires prior knowledge often, or prior, let's say, artistic practice, or at least a practice to go as an audience member in order to know the finer points of the stories, of how it came to be. How do you relate to that notion?
Well, it's hard for me to have the same position like Milo or Edouard, because I'm not an artist and I don't have a real important relation with art and with creation. I don't have a huge culture, to be honest. I don't read a lot of literature or theater. I only read theory and philosophy and sociology. So this is my world, and this is my environment. For me, when I know about the notion of repertoire of the classic, for me it would be the point of departure of an interrogation about the world of culture as a world of terrorism, of terror. You always have to accept the importance of piece of art. You always have to recognize that, I don't know, Molière, Racine, Corneille, I don't know, Dante, and so on is important. And Bourdieu has a very, very important idea. He says it's very hard in the world of art to distinguish between what people really think of a piece of art and the fact that when they speak about art, they voice the opinion they think is legitimate, or they think will make them look pretty or smart or intelligent. And in the world of art, there is no such thing as a real taste. It is a world where you always anticipate: are people going to see me as a clever or of barbarian? Am I going to be seen as ignorant or with a huge culture? And so the anticipation of the reception of what you say is so important in the world of art, and nothing is more shameful in this world than to be with no culture, to say, I don't know this artist, I don't know this writer, I don't know this piece. That in fact the repertoire is for me the repetition of acts of terror by which we think we have to recognize the importance of the world, of the piece of art of the past, and so I don't have any I don't fetishize what has been done. And so if, for example, people would say we will never show any piece of theater by Corneille now, I would not have any problem with that. I would just do a small thing about what Milo said, because you asked the first question about what would be the challenge of a leftist art today, and he spoke about I remember the notion of the process, that is more important than the first of the premiere, and to put the process of the core of the production of a theater play. And I think indeed what on the tension of a politically motivated and ethical art today is a tension between, it's impossible to do art without taking into account the apparatus into which you are inscribed when you produce art. And if you don't interrogate the form of the museum, of the form of the theater play, of the form of I don't know, a gallery, you will be the victim of a system you don't address, and so you will be part of this reproduction of this system, which is part of the system of cultural domination. So you have to interrogate in your play or your art the apparatus of art. But the problem with that is when you do that, sometimes art becomes more and more about art, and the challenge for artists is not to transform art as an art, an art about the process of art, which will in fact forget the world, forget the big questions, you know. And so I think one of the most important tensions or challenges, in fact, for artists today is how to interrogate art in the process of producing art without doing an art that is about art, you know. And I think that's one of the most important issues.
Now, Edouard, please feel free to react to other questions here and including the repertoire, but I was wondering in your case, because you have experience of two very different artistic processes, from writing on the one hand, which is to an extent quite solitary, and more recently working as part of an artistic team for a play and playing yourself in Who Killed My Father, directed by Thomas Ostermeyer. How did you experience the difference between those two processes, and did that shift your perspective on what we've been discussing?
Yeah, clearly those two exercises were extremely different. Being alone every day for 2 years or 3 years in writing your book, or being every day with a team and discussing with people, and also being confronted then when the show starts to the people every day. Is something really, it's two completely different experience. And from that point, there is something that theater has that literature don't have, because theater is, as we were talking about confrontation, theater has a huge confrontational power, you know, because you are here in front of the people, in front of the people you are talking to, and they have their bodies in front of you, and they have to be confronted to what you say. They can escape, they can, you know, like stand up and walk out the room, but it's much more difficult than just like closing the book and forgetting about it. And for me, this is what is beautiful in theater. It's like this suspension of liberty for a few minutes, for 1 hour, for 1 hour 30, that pushes you to really see what you are confronted to really see what the artist is confronting you to. And you know, I very, very often quote this scene of when I was a teenager. I was a gay boy in the closet, and one day I went to see Angels in America in the theater. And since my birth, I knew that I had desire for men, that I was gay, that I was attracted to men, but I was ashamed of it, and I hated myself for that. And so I was trying to bury it, like inside me, as deep as I could. And one day I went to see with high school Angels in America, and I saw those men like kissing and touching each other and like having sex on stage. And suddenly it was impossible to not see what was going on. And I eventually stood up and walked out the room, and I said, I don't want to see that faggot things. Because I was closeted, because I had interiorized the homophobia of my father, of my milieu, of the hate of myself. But the fact that I walked out was the evidence that it was already too late. And for me, the theater really, really opens this possibility of, if we, as I was saying before yesterday, if we consider that people already know how ugly the world is, they know how bad the world is, they know how violent the world is, but they don't want to see it, and the bourgeoisie is constantly building like physical strategies in order to turn their eyes, to turn their head, to never see it, then theater is a particular place of confrontation. And it really makes people mad. And I felt that power that I had on the stage that I didn't necessarily have in the process of writing. So this is once again the opposite of what Sartre called the art engagé, the committed art, because Sartre was saying we call the liberty of the reader. But I don't want to call the liberty of the reader or of the person in front of me, because I know that if I give them this liberty, they will turn their head and escape what I'm saying and try to deny what I'm saying and to deny the reality we are presenting. The project is precisely the opposite, a suspension of liberty. and not a suspension of liberty forever, or not like a dictatorial moment, but like facing people to what they don't want to see, exactly like the boys that I was didn't want to see what it was. But the fact that I was suddenly uncomfortable, the fact that I didn't feel good, the fact that I didn't feel safe, that led me to liberation. And that's why also in the current American situation, political American situation, in the side of the liberal, where everything, all the conversation is around like the idea of like feeling safe, safe space, feeling comfortable, there are no revolutionary art possible, because you, of course, achieve transformation only if you make people uncomfortable, and only if you don't make people feel safe. And this is what the theater offers. If you just want people to be safe, it means that the bourgeoisie will be safe in its ugliness and in its reproduction of the ugly world. And this is why I want to continue acting now and continue being on stage, and that's why I'm going to build this project with Milo that we started to work on, and like this video is a little bit part of it, but we will try to find ways of confrontation, of more and more confrontation.
That was going to be my next question, because of course you two are working together at the moment. Do you want to tell us a little more about, first of all, what brought you together perhaps for a project and what you're working on at the moment?
It's a love story. No, go, Milo.
Yeah. I mean, I'm also searching. We have now I have the impression, huge complexes of discussion and of meetings and of ideas, and we met from Berenice until I think making a film together with Isabelle Huppert, and we had many ideas what we could do. And of course, one idea for me always is the necessity. Why exactly would you be at that moment on stage? So that's my big question I have, of course, and I think it came from that necessity. I remember from our not first discussion when we said we want to do a project, but one of the first ones, and Edouard couldn't write because it was wrong what he was writing, and he didn't know why. And I think even Geoffroy was saying it's a great text, but he felt it's wrong, or and that you have somehow the feeling, and I think the theater is the best place to feel it. That you really feel in every moment if it's right or wrong or necessary what you're doing. And I think it's very much linked to what we discussed now about freedom and safety and purity and all this kind of neoliberal methodology where the theater is, of course, one of the main spaces of it. When you think about theater, you think, I will be free, and I will be safe, and it will be tolerant, and all antagonisms will be outside, and everybody will love everybody. And to find a place of complete exposure, losing your own methodology, how you want to perhaps present you, kind of, because, I mean, listening to Geoffroy and Edouard, I understood that I think in this very moment, the myth of freedom in art and the myth of safety in art is completely linked to avoid revolution and change in any way. So that's what is, and that's why it's interesting for me. It was interesting to read this Racine-like Mozart libretto in the last weeks when I was doing this opera, where you had kind of this really closed space of the elitist rhetorics about tolerance that exists since hundreds of years in the very same way. I would even not link it to the bourgeoisie, I would just link it to the ruling class, actually. So there were always good leaders with open spaces and safe spaces and so on. So, and I think to destroy these spaces of freedom, you can't leave. I call it sometimes a Stalinist space, the theater. You can't leave, you have to stay until the end. I remember I was in a play by Luc Perceval, a director who is working in my place in Ent again too. 10 years ago, when he became famous, I was in the first row. And I made the mistake that I was drinking 2 big beers before going to the premiere. And after 10 minutes, I had to go to the toilet. But because it's theater, it's impossible. You can't leave. I was in the middle of the row. And I was suffering like a dog for 3 hours. And I was thinking I will die. But this, for me, it seems a bit absurd, and it's of course a coincidence. But for me, this is what I want to achieve somehow. That you would be physically completely present. You can't escape to the situation. You're confronted to whatever. Many times I start to, when I'm listening to somebody, I start to think parallelly. It's not that the myth of intention is also very wrong. Even boredom, even that you have the possibility to think something else while you are watching, for me in theater is very important. That you have this space where you are still kind of free, but you are locked. And I think exploring this space, we also call it a bit Histoire du théâtre. Of course, it will be also an investigation on what role played theater in our lives. In Edouard's life, he mentioned this Angels of America moment, for example. In my life, what are the different values of these methods to be together in one room, and so on. So but much more we don't know. I think over next week we really start, and we write this text.
To be continued for perhaps to see that in the coming seasons. But I'd be curious to know how you create the conditions for that practice to happen, for that process to happen, because of course there is what happens in the creation process itself, but there is also the working conditions behind for the people you're working with, for the collective. Is that something that you consider, that you considered, for instance, when you took over an institution like Inszenierung, how to create the conditions for people to do their best work and hopefully make the place you're working in as fair as possible and as representative of what you'd like to see in society as possible?
I will, because you are mentioning Inszenierung, I will just, I will add. For me, again, being explicit is very important. I mean, you can tell whatever you want, but politics means that you have, for example, a manifesto, and there are written the rules, and everybody who enters that space will know the rules, and you can be measured. You can say, but you did this, and you said you want this, and here it's written. I think this is very, again, it's a bit Stalinist, but it's very important that everybody, for me, knows what are these conditions you describe. And what we try to do, and now we are reformulating the Ghent Manifesto, of course, again and again, to make these rules known to everybody. Another point for me important is, we can discuss this, Edouard, but normally all my rehearsals are open to public. There is always somebody present. Now it's a bit difficult because of COVID. But for example, that this discussion is open to everybody who wants to join, perhaps 50 people or 200 people or 5,000 people, but everybody who wants can listen and can even leave a comment. And I think this is I mean, it seems superficial. And of course, then you have all the regulations that you would give to a project and that you would learn step by step. And every project is quite different. For example, I have many rules I normally use. I don't adapt to the project with Edouard because it's a monologue. So different languages or non-professionals or etc. makes not so much sense. If not, it's already mixed in Edouard himself. But I mean, it's for me, being explicit is the point, actually.
That's Geoffroy, if you want to comment on that, but I was thinking that you write about the ways in which institutions, by their very existence, in many ways, sort of keep reproducing kind of exclusivity for the audience. Do you think, what are the conditions under which you think institutions, public institutions, can actually start creating more the conditions for popular art to thrive and reach its audience?
Well, indeed, it's a very hard question, because the problem with art is that there is always a very big difference because what people think they are doing and what they objectively do, you know. And the problem with art is that very often, for example, people think they are doing a piece of art that is open because there will be no guide, because there will be no explanation, because it will be spontaneous. And in fact, when you are a sociologist, you know it's the art that is the most intimidated in the social world, because popular classes need the code to understand. They need to feel guided, you know, because they know nothing. And so at the end, when you think you do something which is open, it's free, there is no rule, you can do whatever whatever you want in the space of the museum. In fact, you have the most elite bourgeoisie inside the exposition, and the popular classes, they feel completely excluded by it. So in fact, and I think that's true, if you want to transform art into popular art, if you want to do an art that would be able to circulate into different kind of public sphere, in fact, you have to change the school system too. You have to change the habitus and the way people see art, how they learn, how to behave. And the simple fact to sit in a theater and to see something and to wait 2 hours requires years and years of domestication of your body in order just to be able to sit and to shut and and not to move, which is already a selective process. When Milo was talking about his experience with beer and the urge to pee inside of in front of a piece of art, I was thinking in political theory, we have exactly the opposite idea, that the possibility for a government to be good is when it opens the possibility for people to flee or to go away. You have this theory, liberal theory of libertarian theory, that the possibility to exit a society is the most powerful tool to force government to be good, because if they are not good, people will leave and they will have nobody to submit to their power. So, and for me, for example, when I go to a theater play, I always dream of a system where you could escape the play by going under your seat, and disappear where you hate the piece, And I think people in theater would do much better play if they knew everybody could disappear at about 10 minutes after it began, because it's too awful, And when you write a book, this question is a very, very good question, because you know that people can close your book and say, okay, it's boring, I don't read it anymore. And so there is this right to exit. Yes, there is this right to exit, which is in fact a question that you have to address when you are a writer. And sometimes people in opera or dance or theater, they know they are taking people into a stage, and they are too violent with the public, violent in the sense that they are too bad, because they don't have this fear that people will leave. And so I think that for me, in fact, I don't agree with your ethics of hostage, and I prefer an ethics of letting people free to go. But yeah, I don't know if I answered the question, but I think just to address the question of the school system is very important to transform culture. You cannot transform culture with an autonomous cultural practice. It's too linked to class society, to school system, to the people who are the possibility to just take a distance from the daily life, and people who are immersed in necessity, And so you cannot change art if you don't change a society, economic structure, and the school system.
Now, Edouard, I was going to ask if you were ever worried that people were going to flee when you stepped on stage last year, but perhaps more generally as well. I know that I suppose the tour of the production was not as extensive as it was planned because of the pandemic. But from your experience of being on stage so far, do you find that the reactions that you get from people, whether it's in writing or just after a performance, the discussions that you have are different in nature from the reactions that you get after publishing a book?
No, not really. I would say that the conversations that I have after performing on stage or after like a public discussion about the book are pretty much the same. And it's mostly about making people talk about them, making people talk about themselves, making people understand that they are part of a society with its violent mechanisms that we don't necessarily always see, that they are part of groups that endure certain social mechanism that make them fragile or precarious and everything. And this is for me really this is the goal of what I do when I do art. It's to make people speak. It's to make people talk. And as Geoffroy said, even if I disagree with him also a little bit, and also what he just said is also framed by the fact that he doesn't like art, so he always wants to escape. And he's my closer friend, so I know I offered him so many novels that I love so much, like Claude Simon or James Baldwin or Simone de Beauvoir, that he never wants to read because he reads so much philosophy all the time and it takes all the space in his life. But the thing is, what is true in what Geoffroy says is that, of course, and we know it, the system of art is based on a system of exclusion, and who have access to it and who don't have access to it, and who can talk about it and who can feel silent, who is silent by the arts. You know, you don't understand, you are not able to understand, you will not understand, like is most of the a huge part of the contemporary art of the modern art, you know, which when working class people go, they don't understand anything, they don't have any keys to understand, they don't have the frame to understand, and then they feel completely excluded. So in terms of explicit, what would be an art that don't reduce people to silence, but that would make them talk, you know? And when Simone de Beauvoir published The Second Sex, about women, she says in a memoir that suddenly she got hundreds of letters from women saying, I had this experience with my husband, I had this experience in my life, I was subjected to a certain role during my whole life, and in the past I didn't know it. People were living next to their life, and they didn't have even the ability to say I, you know. And for me, also, a radical piece of art is a piece of art that gives this possibility to the people to say I. I never understand the people who say that we live in a too individualist society where everyone wants to say I, where everyone wants to talk about themselves, where everyone. I don't see it anywhere. I just see people for whom it's so difficult to say I, to say I am a person, I had suffered through, like all the working class people in my childhood, for them it was almost impossible to say I am someone, I experienced something. And so it's a problem of the bourgeoisie, once again, to think that too many people say hi. And also that's why I think that autobiographical art is also an art of resistance today, in the present, because it's suddenly so many people who didn't have access to this first-person speech who make it and suddenly give the possibility to other people to make it. And that's why, for example, the rap music is a deeply autobiographical art, because it's mostly people who are excluded from the legitimate field of art, who suddenly take a speech, take the power, and they say I, and it gives the possibility to other people to understand that they are also I, that they are a subject, that they, and so this is really the experience that I'm trying to create. If I'm clear, it's never easy to be clear on Zoom, right? on I don't know what's the app.
It was very clear. I think we're nearing the end of our time together, so I think we'll have to leave it here. But I just want to say thank you to anyone who followed, whether you followed over the past 3 days or you just tuned in today. I hope you got something out of this conversation and that you'll keep following along. I think you have a conversation around the Revolt of Dignity at 5 p.m. as well, and the new Gospel, the film inspired by the Bible that we discussed briefly in our conversations by Milo Rau. Huge thank you to Edouard Louis, to Geoffroy de Lagasnerie, and of course to Milo Rau for being with me and allowing me to
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura, for moderating. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And see all of you very soon.
You.
Or
Thank
the
you.
next days.
Yes.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Bye.
And write
Bye.
confrontational art.
Yes. Next week it starts.
Bye.
Bye.
So I have to go to pee, actually.